right, welcome everyone to Spirit Coffee Talk. I'm Ginette Byro, and with me is Elyse Richmond and Elyse Catherine, and we are the mediums and channelers at Avalon Spirit. And every week we get together and we chat about, things going on in the collective, things going on for us that we're seeing in mediumship sessions, the energies, messages from our spirit guides, you name it. So definitely grab your coffee, because today we're going to dive in and we're going to talk about ego death. Ego death, the ominous words. Actually, those are pretty big ominous words, those two of them, ego and death. And this topic today really stems from what we're noticing in the collective energy right now, how we're really being confronted with validating, acknowledging, and seeing as clearly as possible where our ego is playing a role and where we're finding that old egoic versions of self are dying. And so something that really prompted this for today's talk was a conversation I saw between Russell Brand and Eckhart Tolle recently, which was talking exactly about this, how collectively we are in a frequency right now, in a phase of growth and consciousness where people are being pushed really hard to confront their ego, to confront the piece of themselves that has been keeping them safe, that has been trying to protect them, but has reached a point now where it's actually limiting. So when we confront that nature, it's very revealing. It's a very vulnerable thing, and it can be very unnerving, which most of us will often try to run from at first. I know I definitely have before in the past, but when we kind of embrace the process of it, we realize it's actually burning off layers that we don't need anymore with the direction we're going. And so it's actually a really good thing we're going through, but like I said, it can be really unnerving. So let's dive into this idea, ladies. How are you feeling about this experience of ego death right now?
I'm seeing it in myself, in clients, coaching clients, reading clients, really big confronting things that are kind of coming out of nowhere. Like, it feels like people are trucking along, going on their day to day, and things have been really up and down for a lot of people for a while, right? We've talked about this a lot over the last couple of years, but it seems like it's like these really big, like, frankly, confrontational things that kind of just come up in your face that you have to address, right? You really can't ignore, because they're so big and in your face. And I feel as though, or I wonder if that's for that exact reason, right? Maybe for folks, if we've been struggling with a lot of the ups and downs, and maybe even like healing fatigue, right? Like feeling like it's to like no end, especially the last couple of years. It's really been a lot over and over and over again. And I almost feel like the things that Spirit is wanting us to address, like, okay, if this is the one thing you're going to heal through this year, it has to be this. And it's like that kind of final, really big push to confront those things. And it's a lot. Like it's felt really, really big. I know for myself and for a lot of other folks too. So it's been a lot, I think, for people.
Mm-hmm. One thing I do want to say too about the concept of ego death, the ego is not a bad thing, right? Our ego is not a negative. It is just like a guardian. It's like a built-in guardian of an aspect of self. And so it will alert us to something that doesn't feel right. But the thing is when we talk about ego death, we're not saying die, ego, die. We're saying the egoic nature, or the ego that's trying to protect self, that is actually starting to hinder in its desire to protect, is what is needing to burn away now. So it's a layer of self that doesn't apply to the frequencies that we're moving into. It's not about it being gone. You can work really well with your ego. I know in some areas of my life where I feel I have a good relationship with my ego, I can have my ego essentially sit in the passenger seat with me. I'm the one driving the vehicle, but I will listen when it pipes up and says, hey, what about this? What's going on with this? Or we should go the other way. I will take into account what it's saying, but then I will measure it against my own frequency and choose consciously what I want to do going forward, rather than switch spots with my ego and let the ego drive.
Mm-hmm.
right? So I think we go from ego death in a sense to like ego partnership,
Mm-hmm.
where we don't let it kind of run the show.
Yeah, because it's there to keep us safe, right?
Yeah.
Like that's the primary piece. But like you were saying, sometimes those safety mechanisms aren't actually doing what they're meant to anymore. They're holding us back from greater things. And so it becomes like we don't want to, my toxic trait is that I feel like if I run into a bear, I'm going to just be able to have it, give it a hug. But my ego is going to say, no, that bear might eat you. So cautious, do this, do that, be afraid, be nervous, be whatever. Um, that's an important thing as a human being to have. So it's like, yeah, I completely agree. Not to make it go away, but just to renegotiate what it's trying to keep you safe from, because it's not always in your highest good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How about you, Lisa?
I'd like to kind of use an example actually, so that it can kind of be maybe, I don't know, I always find that just like little examples or like using things in metaphors can help the understanding of the whole concept. So an example of an ego playing a large role and then almost experiencing a death of that ego or that aspect of your ego. So it's not like your whole entire ego, right? It's like, so this is the example that I'm kind of given. If someone, when they're younger, let's say in their younger years, in their very formative years, on a regular basis, found that using their voice or stepping forward and saying what they wanted was then, you know, what do you say, responded with a negative something from a caregiver, let's say. So let's say little girl stands up and she says no, and like, and then she say like, no, you don't use your voice. So they've been, reprimanded for a certain behavior. And so then all of a sudden what the ego will do to keep you safe will be to make sure that your subconscious knows that it's not safe to use that aspect of your voice. Okay. And so then all of a sudden the behavior and the connections that's made as you continue to grow and develop is my authentic voice and my strongest no isn't safe. So what do is I back it up with an inauthentic version of this sweet. This is just an example. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So then this person continues to grow up and, develop into relationships or behavioral patterns where using the authentic no or a strong authoritarian voice is never used. So they'll develop these behavioral whatever to kind of keep them safe until all of a sudden they reach a place in time where they're like, it's not working for them anymore, but they don't know why. And all of a sudden they're coming up against it, and their relationships and the people that they continue to bring in are coming into this conflict, and their partner might say like, why is it so hard for you to tell me how you feel? Why don't you ever actually stand up and say what you want? And I don't know. Like, I'm fine. I'm fine. Right. And then all of a sudden that's your ego speaking. The ego is the part of you that's saying it isn't actually safe to use your authentic voice and say no, but they don't really know why. Right. But it's not like the ego is trying to keep you back from being your authentic self. The ego is trying to keep you safe in a, an informative way. That is what that subconscious part of yourself believes is true in that state to keep you safe. And so an ego death in sort can be all of a sudden this whole like turning of these patterns, behavioral patterns, responses, relationships that all of a sudden get overturned. And you're all of a sudden seeing face to face with a part of yourself that wants to be heard so bad. And all of a sudden you're learning. And so it comes out in these different ways and you feel like you're not yourself. And it's trying to allow that part of your ego or that part of your consciousness that's saying, I don't need you to keep me safe anymore. I am learning how to use this for the first time. Thank you for showing up and trying to keep me safe by making me say these inauthentic things or trying to present myself in a way that feels safe. But really, it's now developing this pattern from sometimes since they were very, very little to be able to reintroduce who you actually are to not only yourself, but everybody in your life. And that in itself can be that aspect of your ego that is experiencing a death because they're not there to stand up and keep you safe all the time anymore. It has to essentially, that part of you, that, you know, gatekeeper, die away, because now you're ready to be able to expose that natural aspect of self. And sometimes those ego deaths can feel very unsafe, unfamiliar, where that part of you is so exposed, so vulnerable. But we're seeing it in not only aspects of personality, but entire livelihoods. It can be, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then much further than that, it can be systemic stuff. It can be entire family dynamics, right? So ego deaths can be very small, daily things that you're kind of working through, but it can also, as we're talking about, we can see in these larger scale things that feel like a whole uprooting of a system is essentially kind of like an ego death in a whole systemic thing. So that's how, I don't know, I'm kind of bringing that example into a real life kind of
I agree,
scenario.
though. I know for myself, when I've experienced, like, in my life so far, so far, I've experienced a couple significant ego deaths where I have emerged from it very different than I was before. But the key thing that I noticed in that experience of that layer of ego needing to burn off is, like you were saying, multiple angles were showing me the same thing. So that can be a whole change in, like, relationships with several different people, communities, directions, right? Like unrelated people, but it's changing all throughout the whole thing, right? It's like lightning, and it spreads through everything. It's not just one area, and it'll be very confronting, so that we do pay attention, because most of the time, again, not all, but most of the time, if it was only in one direction, we wouldn't pay attention to it enough. So it kind of needs to permeate all things to shake us completely, essentially flip us upside down, to then start from the beginning again and be like, oh, what do I need to see here? And now that I see that, what do I want to change about it? But the cool thing is ego death always lets us come out renewed. Sometimes we might feel like we've been through a battle, like huge battle though, right? I'm not saying we're renewed and we're like, yippity yay. I mean, we might get to that point, but ego death is not for the faint of heart. It's a deep, deep, deep journey that rattles every aspect of your being.
And
but
some of the hardest
always
parts
with
of it,
purpose.
Totally. And I think a lot of the times, and what I'm seeing for people that are close to me or clients or anywhere really, is that when experiencing this ego death, you hear the question like, am I crazy? Like, you know, and like you said, there's multiple facets of their life that are confronting it, and they're like, why can't I do this anymore? It used to be so easy, but why can't I do this? Why are these relationships just like faulting? And through the experience and understanding of this ego death, and like really day by day, minute by minute, as it transpires, you'll find brutal truth. Either your current relationships will significantly change and alter into the way that aligns with that new aspect, or they will fizzle off and be complete. And I say to some people, sometimes that's okay. It's like an expiry date, right? We don't judge the milk in the fridge if it's expired and we no longer need it.
I
It's
do.
like, no, you were, but it's like, you were here, you served a purpose when you were in its freshest point, and we had this like mutual relationship of goodness. And then expiry date, it's not like, oh my God, such a terrible person for having expired milk. Like, why can't we just be the way we were before you were curdled? You know what I mean? I know it's a ridiculous example, but honestly, some things just have expiry dates when they don't align anymore. And it was built on a foundation that was truly led by a certain aspect of your life that might have been driven by an old ego part that you have expired from, that you no longer need. Then, but like, that can be tough, right? When you're confronted with some of these relationships that fizzle off, or your connection or belief system in something, or, you know, like when all of a sudden that changes, that's brave. When you can be confronted by a relationship that was very important, or a belief system that was very, very much a part of who you were, and all of a sudden you're confronted with it and it's no longer that anymore, it's brave to walk away. It's brave to say, this no longer serves me.
Yeah. I think it's important too that we remember that all of the things that we've been talking about, it's not, like sometimes it'll be, I realize a pattern inside of myself, something is shown to me, et cetera, et cetera. But it can also be external experiences triggering that ego death and like upheaval. So I know for me, I've been talking about him a lot lately, but my dad's death, like I had this whole grief experience, but it also created a massive ego death for me, because I started to notice through my healing a disconnection with my body. And after that, I started to really, through my grief processing, reconnect with my body, realize that like I had a lot of illness going on in my body and a lot of pain came to the surface, which then triggered, you know, an experience of endometriosis that was really severe for a few years and completely changed the way I could exist in my life. And then that changed how I could be in my friendships and my relationships. Yeah. But my grief also changed how I could be in my friendships, my relationships. And then how was I showing up for them? How are they showing up for me? How was I showing up for my, it turned into this whole like unearthing of stuff that was triggered by the grief process that I was going through. And it took a couple years of like revisiting and being with the sadness of relationships changing, or me feeling like I'm changing, me not knowing, me feeling like I didn't know who I was anymore. I didn't understand, my connection with spirit changed, my connection with my partner changed, like my mom, like everything changed. And it took a long time, took a couple years of really revisiting it in different ways and from all of those different realms, Lisa, like you were talking about, to, first of all, you're kind of like, what the hell is happening? Because you kind of feel like, it can kind of feel like your life's falling apart, especially if it's
100%. Am I crazy?
Yeah. And it can feel like, why is this happening to me? Or like, why is everything falling apart all at once? And I think maybe the cue would be, if you're looking around being like, why is everything falling apart? Or like, why do I feel so confronted? Maybe there's a real ego death opportunity happening. And we'll say opportunity because, while it's mucky and it can be really challenging, there can be a lot of beauty in it. There can be a lot of awareness in it. And there's so much growth. And then when you do come out the other side, it's like, you're battered, you're bruised, maybe you're tired. You need to like rest and recharge and refuel a little bit. But then you can move forward in your life knowing that like all of that hard work that you've done was for something and for you and for your own growth and development. Oh, yeah. And that's beautiful, but it's tough.
Ego deaths never happen to set you back in life.
Yeah.
You know, ego death, that's like, you know, ego deaths occur to bring you into growth. Always.
You know, yeah. And I think too that one of the reasons, and I think our hopes in sharing this conversation today is to bring that consciousness into, I mean, all of you that are listening, to bring this consciousness into your awareness. Because if nothing else, going through an ego death, unconscious of it, is so much more terrifying than being conscious of it. Even if you can't change anything and you can't change the feelings per se, but you can actually, if you can hold on to one thread of awareness in it, that this must be an ego death, it almost helps you move through it a little bit with a little bit more stability. It's kind of like, okay, I'm not unconsciously tumbling down this hill, yard sailing my entirety, right? I'm tumbling down this hill, but I'm going to tuck and roll because there's something valuable here and I'm going to make it at the bottom, right? So I find consciousness
literally
is what,
Ginette.
Yeah, right?
Tumble down the hill.
Yeah, such a good visual of just like yard sailing and stuff flying everywhere.
So true. But the consciousness is what helps us consciously choose what we're going to do. And in some cases, potentially move through the ego death faster, right? And I don't mean to necessarily speed it up as in faster, but bring to a close certain things we're resisting if we bring consciousness to it.
Because resistance makes everything more difficult.
Yeah.
Half the time it's so problematic because of the resistance.
Yeah. Well, what we resist persists, right? It just continues.
It totally does. So I think getting curious with what's happening, and because I've been noticing this theme for myself in certain ways. I've been noticing this in certain client readings, in the collective energy. And then I found it really interesting, again, like I said, when I stumbled on that conversation with Russell Brand and Eckhart Tolle, and they were talking about this as well. This is something that is going on in different ways for many people right now. So if we add consciousness to this experience, we will raise our collective consciousness, even the ability collectively to move through the ego death. If we all connect into that consciousness, we will raise it for everyone too. So it doesn't have to be as deep and despair filled as maybe it would have been 50 years ago.
Oh, for sure.
Right? Like there's growth already that we can
Yeah.
pull from. And the more we add to it, the greater we create this lift, right? Which is what we want. Yeah. So I think that's pretty beautiful.
Yeah. One thing I want to add too that I see a lot in my, well, kind of any clients that I work with, and I've seen it in myself too, this idea of, okay, so I'm having an ego death, or there's shadow work, or there's things that need to be done, and I'm going to do all of these things. And there's this real, there sometimes can be, and I think in the self-development world, we can see this in the wellness spiritual world, we can see it too. It's like this push to like heal it and do the work and face your shadow and yes, we do need to do those things, right? Like you were both just saying, what we're going to resist, we'll just continue on, or it'll be helpful, or we'll move through it easier or quicker if we actually embrace it. But there's also, Lisa, you were saying something earlier about how vulnerable it can be and how like we're pulling back the layers of some of the deepest parts of self that are desperately trying to keep us safe. And pushing against that and coming at it from a really intense perspective of like, I need to heal this, I need to fix it, I need to do the work, I need to da-da-da-da-da, can I think be too confronting, right? For that like vulnerable sense of self, it can be too much. And I think it can also add pain and discomfort to the experience. And so what I would offer to people is if you find yourself going through shadow work, if you find yourself facing an ego death, doing so from a place of like comfort and nourishment and nurturing and love, and not this really hard push energy of like, fix it, heal it, do all the things, because that is traumatizing in and of it. That can be really hard and traumatizing for our bodies in and of itself. And if we're doing that in an already vulnerable space, we could be creating a narrative or a new kind of ego belief system of like, being vulnerable hurts me. Doing this work hurts me. Going into the deepest, darkest parts of myself that I am feeling called to heal and unearth is actually going to harm me, because we're experiencing the harm that we're kind of putting on ourselves by pushing too much. So it's like this really delicate balance of do a little bit of work and then like do something really beautiful for yourself. Do some journaling and reflect on what's coming up for you, or cry, or pull cards, or talk with a friend, or somatic work, or whatever it is for you. See a therapist, and then like nurture and nourish yourself and hold those vulnerable, open parts of you via self-care, via comfort, via whatever you feel called to like wrap that warm, loving blanket around you is kind of how I see it.
Mm-hmm. That's a beautiful point. Very beautiful point. I know I'm one that I'm getting better at it, but like in the past, I would try to push myself through it. Like, come on, let's get it done. Let's do this.
You got this.
You know, like dive right in. But yeah, the nurturing and the balance has been imperative. And it actually, you do move through it with a bit more ease and grace when you do that. But for some people,
yeah, because there's almost a tad bit of the ego that's involved in that. Like, let's get it done. You know what I mean? Like that is a little bit of a coping mechanism too that we've been taught in this very like get her done world, right? It's like hardcore 90s were really a push, you know? So totally. I think it's like actually coming at it from a different perspective and seeing it from that different lens is actually a part of the whole ego's death. Because being exposed and extremely vulnerable in something that you're working through, and then not flipping into that automatic, like, it's okay, I'm good, I got this. Just, from 10 to 11:30, I'm going to meditate. And then from noon, like, that's like coping mechanism stuff, man. That's, compensatory strategies, I like to call it.
Yeah. That's very true. Well, I think that's some great awareness and consciousness to add into it. So I'd really say, just to repeat to people is like, notice what repeated patterns are coming up for you in your interactions, especially when they're coming from many different directions. If there's a theme, look for the theme, because it's just trying to shine a light on what you can move through to get you into the next frequency.
And a lot of times I find that it follows with these repeated themes. It follows with the feeling of that dissatisfaction. Because it's kind of like you learned things on how to do things in your life to get a certain reaction, but that's like on a subconscious level, right? When all of a sudden we're doing our daily things, and all of a sudden we're not getting that same feeling of satisfaction, and it's like and then you try even harder, and it's like this isn't working anymore. Then you know that it's like that part of your ego that makes you behave that way to keep you safe is no longer working in your best interest anymore. You've outgrown it. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So no diss on the ego, but it's brought you now into this place and time where things have to change.
Mm-hmm.
So
Absolutely.
that can be if you're listening right now or watching and all of a sudden you're like, yeah, I'm doing XYZ because I'm so used to doing it. And it's just not lighting the fire like it once was. And it's sure not bringing, these growth relationships or these growth mindsets forward anymore. And I feel like a big fish in a small pond, and how do I get out kind of thing. It's like, all right, time for you to dive in gently and lovingly.
Gently.
It's like a soft dive into
a soft blanket.
A tuck and roll dive.
Yeah, a tuck and roll. Tuck and roll with a nice blanket.
Yeah, don't belly flop that one. You don't want to belly flop it.
Be gentle because you'll need it.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
And if you have any questions, anybody about this, feel free to either contact us privately or on the comment section on YouTube, or come on and to our Facebook, Avalon Spirit Facebook page. It's a private group. Just join up, and great discussion. So it's like a safe place for people to kind of come to the table, and it's like, who else is experiencing this? What are some of the stuff? And then being vulnerable in a group of vulnerable people is also very helpful, because there are more people experiencing this than not, I would say right now.
Absolutely. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, ladies. And thank you, everyone, so much for watching and tuning in. And please do share this episode with anyone that you feel it would help ease their heart a little bit. Because, again, consciousness, awareness gives us the power to then choose what we want to do and choose how we can heal. Gives us more power in our movement forward. So thank you guys as always. And we will see you next week.